C3 AI software enables organizations to use artificial intelligence at enterprise scale, solving previously unsolvable problems. C3 AI is enterprise AI.
It's 48 degrees in the University District. This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. Bill Radke is here with Week in Review.
Well. Welcome to Friday and welcome to Week in Review. We're going to go over the week's news for the next hour and figure it out together. All you have to do is stay tuned. Mazda drivers, you don't have a choice. This show is mandatory. We'll discuss. You're going to mandatorily spend an hour, lucky you, with the stranger staff writer Jazz Kaimig. Hi, Jazz.
What's up?
Good to see you again. Seattle Times transportation reporter David Croman. Hey, David.
Hey there.
Nice to have you along. And freelance journalist Joanne Solberner. Joanne, thanks for coming on the show. It's great to see you.
And great to be here.
And I literally can see you, as I always say. We're live streaming the show. You can guess where David is right now. sort of abstract, impressionistic. You can see our guests because we are on YouTube or Facebook. You just search KUOW Public Radio, and you can see it happen. And maybe someday we'll even be in person. We've got COVID case numbers falling. This week, Governor Inslee cited those falling COVID case rates and falling hospitalizations as reasons that he is ending the outdoor big event mask mandate. You will no longer have to mask up at a theoretical Seahawks, Mariners, Rain, Sounders game as of a week from now. Did that make sense? In a week, you can stop masking up at those big crowded 500-person outdoor events. But Governor Inslee, some blue states are dropping their indoor mask requirements. When are we going to do that?
We are obviously having conversations and an intensive review of what day it will be and when we can do this. It is no longer a matter of if, it is a question of when.
Joanne Solberner, health policy is your beat. Why is Governor Inslee lagging behind such Democratic governors as Jersey, New York, Oregon, Connecticut, Delaware, California, when it comes to dropping the indoor mask mandate?
Because there's no clear metric. There's no clear measurement. When should you do it? You should do it when you feel like, and I might lose some people here. I might lose some support. I mean, public health right now, in my 40 years of covering it, I've never seen it so distrusted. And the recommendations that they're making have to be made in a practical way that people will follow. And if you're going to lose everybody, or you're going to lose people who are going to make enough noise, then you've got to take that into account. There's no right or wrong answer. And when you look back at the Spanish flu, at the 1918-1919 pandemic, they dropped a lot of what these are called non-pharmaceutical interventions. Masking, distancing, school closures. They dropped and added over time, just like we're doing now. And it could come back. We could end up needing masks again. Who determines? It's ironic that we're looking to politicians for these answers. It used to be we would look to the CDC or to the Department of Health and Human Services. It's the politicians who are making the decisions, and they are basically making the decisions, I think, based on what their public will tolerate.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that Washington has certainly had one of the more strict, kind of COVID policies. So I'm kind of not surprised to see Inslee kind of taking his time. And I think, from my perspective, I'm totally okay, if, this comes 2 weeks after, Oregon and California and other places. I'm not in a rush to, whip off that mask quite yet. I think the entire globe is getting really tired of this pandemic. And I don't think anyone likes wearing masks, but I think that, in lieu of other interventions, I feel like it's kind of and vaccines, it's one of the best, methods that we have to not continue to spread COVID. So I'm down with him taking his time.
Well, actually, back in, David, let me just put this in for thought, which is back in the beginning of the pandemic. I don't know whether you remember this, but they had a measurement of how many people tested positive versus how many people came in for testing. And there was a cutoff. I think New York State had a 5% cutoff. When 5% of the people coming in for testing, It was some ridiculous number because who was coming in for testing was who qualified for testing. You had to qualify to be tested. There weren't enough tests to go around. There's just no number to give the politicians much guidance.
And I think, Joanne had mentioned following politicians over CDC or Health and Human Services, but what we're hearing from Governor Inslee is that he is following the CDC, because the CDC hasn't come out yet and said it's okay to drop these mask mandates. So, you could make the argument that it's the other governors that are being a little more political about this, while Governor Inslee is trying to go, take the CDC's example. That said, he said in his news conference that he would probably announce a date for dropping the mask mandate next week. And, as long as cases continue to fall, which they seem to be doing, I wouldn't expect him to not do that. It is interesting, though. I mean, I think to a certain extent, we've gotten used to the Omicron numbers because, King County yesterday then reported, I think it was 2,500 cases. And before Omicron, the record was like 1,000 in a day. In Delta's peak, it was, we were talking, when it hit 1,000 a day, that was newsworthy. And so 2,500 yesterday is certainly a lot lower than the 5,000 we had a couple weeks ago, but
that was wild.
Still a very significant number. And 2,500 people have died, are dying every day across the country. So it's, I think to Joanne's point, this is really about, it's less about the presence of the virus, because there's, factually, the virus is here very much so still, but it is a question of, are these mandates, serving the utility that they were supposed to? Are people following them? And will people continue to follow them? And I think that's kind of a lot of what's driving this conversation right now.
Can Governor
we've gotten, one thing we've gotten here that I don't think has happened in most of the other states is people like Inslee and Jeff Duchin have been very careful. If you listen to what they say each time, they're very careful to say, based on what we know now.
Right.
And I'm not hearing that from the federal authorities. I'm not hearing that from a lot of other politicians. And here, I think, and Inslee's remark, we're taking in the information, and the information is changing, and it could go the other way. We could end up having masking again.
Yeah, and Joanne, what you had said about, with the Spanish flu, about how there was, waves of them kind of taking measures and then rolling back and taking measures. There's something that is a little bit comforting in knowing that, there's at least some precedence for this type of, no cloth masks, now N95s, now no masks, right? Because I know that it's a science and that we're learning more as it goes along, but, it can be really exhausting to try to keep up on all the rules.
The head of Washington State's public schools publicly asked the governor to drop the statewide school mask requirement, to just leave it up to local school districts. I tend to assume those kinds of statements are orchestrated. They're both Democrats, and that but why are they doing it this way? Are they feuding in public, or is this all a ballet? This is how it's supposed to happen, that someone suggests and calls for, and someone says, well, as opposed to just being, here's when cases reach this, when testing rates reach this, when availability of kits reach this, when hospitalizations reach that, then this is what's going to happen next.
Well, Chris Reichdahl is independently elected, the head of schools of Washington State. So he doesn't he's not obligated to coordinate his message with Governor Inslee, because he's accountable to the voters. He's not directly accountable to Governor Inslee. I'm thinking about the significance of the mask mandate, and it possibly being dropped. You think about bars, and if you've been in a bar recently, like, you got to put on your mask when you walk in the front door, and maybe when you walk to your table. But then, other than that, everyone's eating and drinking, and no one's really wearing a mask all that much. But I think the one place where the mask mandate really does make a difference, and its repeal would make a difference, is schools, because that's where I think as has been the case through a lot of this pandemic, I think that's where a lot of the biggest tension is, because it's tough to keep kids in masks all day. The requirements around when kids can be in school versus not are confusing, and so I think really that is kind of
when we're talking about the future of the mask mandate, in some ways, we're really talking about the future of the mask mandate in schools.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that he came out, in favor of repealing the mask mandate in schools and kind of talking about how it comes, in between students learning. But, I think earlier in January, hundreds of students were outside the Seattle Public Schools district, headquarters, kind of calling for more PPE and calling for kind of these like greater protections. So it's definitely a very interesting tension. But I agree with Croman. Some of the mask mandates and like music venues and bars and restaurants, it's a bit of hygiene theater, right? Like I'm breathing in all of the aerosols of the table next to me, putting it on when I'm going to the bathroom is not going to do much.
What do you think schools in the Seattle area, where we have very high vaccination rates, but also, I think, relatively high support for masking, is it going to be, if it's school by school, do we know what Seattle would do? Do we know what teachers' unions are saying?
The teachers' unions, I mean, they have tended to be, pretty protective of their members through this whole thing. So they're, I'm not an education reporter, so have not been following this super closely, but, I get the sense that they are, make a big deal out of there being proper protection for their members, which is what you'd expect from a union. But no, I don't know. I don't know what it would look like on a sort of district by district basis.
Mask optional sounds awkward at school.
Right, and probably not that effective either.
Yeah.
But again, the information has been changing a little bit over time. I think we've known since fairly early on that kids are not super spreaders, or at least they weren't with Delta. I don't know that there's data now on Omicron, and vaccines are coming in now. The FDA is now actively considering vaccinations for infants, or for I guess 2-year-olds. I can't remember the numbers, but so that and a lot of kids have brothers and sisters at home, and if their brothers and sisters are vaccinated and they're going to school, they're less of a risk to others than if their little brothers and sisters aren't. So new information's coming in over time. And that's, I think, Bill, your general line of questioning is really important. It's like, how do you make these decisions and who makes them? And there were protocols there were all sorts of emergency preparedness plans in place, national ones, states all had emergency preparedness plans, and it all went out the door. People have thought about these things, and they're not when everything hit the flames, we're not going back to any kind of standards. It strikes me as so ad hoc.
Mm-hmm. One last, by the way, I just saw this morning, this is Friday as we're doing the show live, the FDA has changed its mind. Apparently it's going to wait for more data on the Pfizer vaccine before deciding whether to authorize it for kids under 5 years old.
Interesting.
Yeah. Apparently the results from Pfizer's clinical trial have been mixed, and so they're still discussing about that. But one last thing before we leave COVID and go on to other things this week is that Joanne, you pointed out the New York Times, I saw this too. The New York Times ran an essay by a priest who was saying it's understandably difficult to feel compassion for an anti-vaxxer who dies of COVID, but that it's good for us to make that difficult leap of compassion. And then the letters to the editor included one from Seattle that I'm sure to many Americans epitomizes our city's attitude. What was that, Joanne?
Well, it was the letter wasn't the letter agreeing. The letter was saying, how can you feel compassion for these people? They're infecting me and other people. They
Right.
infected my family.
They deserve no compassion.
They deserve no compassion. And some of the late night comics have talked about this as well and gotten good laughs out of it. The question though is, how do you operationalize that? I think it's hard, even the most saintly among us are going to be a little bit annoyed that somebody else has infected our family. Somebody else has, and when you picture doctors and nurses, and they're going home to their families, they're possibly carrying they're working god awful hours, and then they get infected and get sick, or they bring it home to their families and get them sick. You can understand where they might think, why should I be, and I'm sure they ask themselves that, and they come back to work. And why do they come back to work? It's their training is in compassion, their training is in treatment. When a fat person comes in with a heart attack, they don't say, well, you're fat. I'm not going to treat you. You asked for this with every, by not taking care of your weight. You can't, if you make judgments on illnesses before you treat people, a smoker comes in with lung cancer, you say, oh, sorry. The difference there, it's not infectious, lung cancer is not infectious, but, any of the infectious diseases, sexually transmitted diseases, you can't just say, well, you asked for it, you can't walk away. And if we follow through on that, how would we do it? Would we have some clerk in the front office saying, let me check your vaccination records. When someone comes in distress, let me check your vaccine. Oh, wait, no, you haven't been vaccinated. Go. How could you say that to a person? Directly face. Do you want to go to a doctor, or do you want to be in a hospital where a clerk is hired to do that? You can't do it. I think we all have the feeling, but I don't see how you can do it.
I don't know whether that letter writer wanted people to be turned away for being, anti-vaxxers, but he was definitely getting at this. Don't tell me to feel compassion. Right. He was very dismissive, which is.
I understand the feeling, and
yeah. I think it's really easy to feel that way, but I think kind of getting mad at individuals for this problem that, exists on such a societal and structural level isn't going to be as satisfactory. And I find myself more mad at the system that kind of allowed this to happen in such like a flagrant way, and, not paying people to stay home enough, or, opening or closing too quickly. I think those are the things that kind of deserve the most kind of anger, as opposed to, localizing it down to one person, right? I think that's when you kind of start to get into trouble with blame.
Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
Okay. You're listening to Week in Review on KUOW. We've been updating you on falling case rates with COVID, and the governor has dropped the outdoor big event mask mandate as of next week. And it sounds like the panel I expect some kind of announcement soon, maybe next week, on the indoor mask mandate. We'll see. We're going to take a pause and get right back. Keep listening to KUOW. As if you could do anything else, Mazda drivers. More than we can review.
Thanks for being with us on 94.9 KUOW. It's 12:23.
Support for KUOW comes from BECU, a member-owned credit union putting people over profit, offering financial services and support to the community with access to local financial centers, over 30,000 ATMs, and online resources at becu.org, federally insured by NCUA.
Russia ups the ante in Belarus and on the Black Sea. To our north, Canada's truck protest starts to hit home.
It has to stop.
Australia, New Zealand, and France wrestle with their own freedom convoys and their skater and ski suit fallout from the first week of the Winter Games. We'll get to all of it on the Friday News Roundup, next time on 1A.
And you can hear that at 9 o'clock tonight here on KUOW. Let's return to Week in Review with Bill Radke.
We're figuring out what went down this week with my journalist guests, freelance journalist Joanne Silberner, Seattle Times David Croman, and The Strangers Jazz Kaimig. Do you ever feel like you've got too many choices? What if you could just pick someone whose judgment you trust, and you wouldn't have to stare at 60 kinds of coffee beans? This person would buy them for you. They would tell you which novel you're going to read, how your money will be invested. And you know what? It'll be fine. It'll be good enough. And you'll suddenly have triple the free time and mental space and calm. That's the dream. Mazda drivers are living the dream this week. Thanks to, for a while more, thanks to some kind of glitch, KUOW's high definition signal is causing local Mazda entertainment systems to be stuck on this radio station. Seattle Mazda motorist Scott Smith says it's weird.
You can adjust the volume. You can't change the stations. Luckily, I am an NPR listener, and that's fine. NPR.
Mazda dealerships say they're flooded with calls, Joanna. I assume that's people calling to thank them?
Let's hope.
No. I wasn't aware there were other radio stations. I don't know that this is a problem, but I'm in a KUOW bubble. Did you all hear about this story as well?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joanne. I have to confess, I can't work my car's navigation system. So the idea, I wouldn't know. It would either be on KUOW or KNKX, depending on what I'd last listened to, and that's where it is. I'm stuck, and I don't own a Mazda anymore. I now have an EV, and they're just starting to market their EVs this year. I have a Hyundai, but I had Mazdas for literally 25 years. I had a couple of cars in their early years of the model. They're wonderful cars. And I just can't imagine how current Mazda drivers must feel about being dictated to like that.
Yeah, it's big public radio, the long arm of big public radio coming out. But it is kind of the definition of like a first world problem, I think. But hearing some of the, I think the screen glitches, people aren't able to use their backup cameras. So I mean, it's definitely, I feel like it would be pretty irritating, even as a devoted KUOW listener, to not be able to have access to all of that, stuff that you paid for in your car. Yeah. And the replacement, it's like $1,500, right? It's a nice big chunk of change.
And it's not even available.
Mazda's saying that they'll fix it for you, but it's going to take a long time. It's going to take, there's supply chain issues, many, many weeks. And David, it's not just the, as Jazz was suggesting, it's the rear camera, but it's the GPS, it's the Bluetooth phone connection. KUOW is accidentally really lousing up the system for Mazda drivers between 2014 and 2017. That's the time period.
Yeah, I mean, we talk in the world of journalism about making an impact, and you guys are really doing that.
Really. All right. Well,
wait a minute. Do you know how this happened?
Well, I'm not sure. Mazda basically blamed KUOW. They said that because HD high definition radio signals carry other information, like what song is playing right now. You know that. So Mazda said that KUOW transmitted image files with no extension. Which is an explosive accusation, Mazda. You better be ready to back that up. But I don't know whether that's true or not. There's been many theories.
But if KUOW can take down a Mazda with a Word document, I feel like Mazda has bigger problems to fix.
That's true. Yeah, and there was like a big upgrade to 5G recently, right? And that's kind of another theory that's going around, is that the Mazda's computers could only really operate on 3G, at least from that era.
Our operations manager, by the way, debunked that.
Oh, really?
I tend to trust Dane. I know him and he knows what he's talking about. I'm no expert. He says it's not a 5G thing.
But my big fear is, when they're coming up with these driverless cars that are going to really be dependent on communications, are they going to all make us drive to KUOW? We're going to show up at your doorstep.
I think the urbanists win this round, go on a walk.
Well, KUOW is trying to come up with some commemorative bumper stickers to send to those poor Mazda drivers. So we are asking for slogan ideas. So far, we've heard, I wouldn't change the station even if I could. I can't stop listening, and I've tried. I wish my car was stuck on KUOW. That's for non-Mazda drivers. Support KUOW. You have no choice. Feel free to get on Twitter, get on Facebook, and ideas. And I just want to say to those Mazda owners, you are getting too much value for your pledge drive contribution. You owe us more money. Contact your local dealer, and they said they're going to fix it for free. Okay, this is Week in Review on KUOW, and there is actually other news of the week to discuss. For more than 2 months now, people who drive not Mazdas, but concrete mixing trucks in the Seattle area have been on strike. This is Teamster driver Jerry Pileman saying drivers didn't want to quit working, but when you stop negotiating, that's what happens.
We're in a fight for our future. A lot of this has to do with our retiree program for medical and our fair wage increase that keeps us in line with all the other trades, and our pension.
Audio from Fox 13, by the way. And this might sound like a very localized dispute, except transportation reporter David Croman, this is a city where people are building a lot of giant projects and fixing large bridges. And right now it is not happening. Thousands of people are out of work. David, there have been concrete strikes before, but why does this one keep going on and on and on and on at such high cost?
Well, the cost is high because we're in, like you said, we're in Seattle. Seattle is building a lot of things, particularly around transportation. Sound Transit, we're in the middle of a many billion-dollar expansion of our Link Light Rail system, and as a result of this, Sound Transit says it's laid off 300 workers who have not been able to work because they don't have concrete. We are adding a rapid ride bus line on Madison Avenue. That is slowing as a result of this. The other day, this sort of came as a surprise, but the other day, Mayor Bruce Harrell said that the West Seattle Bridge reopening could be delayed as a result of this. And I think I saw that Councilmember Herbold said they only need something like 20 more truckloads of concrete to finish that, but they can't get it because they're everybody's on strike. And so what we saw this week was kind of a step that I haven't seen elected officials take when it comes to labor negotiations, which is King County Executive Dow Constantine coming out and basically offering an exclusive contract to any concrete company that has an existing collective bargaining agreement in place that will last for at least 3 years. And so what he's doing here is, because we've seen this strike sort of play out across a few companies, and they have mostly stuck together. And so what he seems to be doing here is kind of dangling a carrot for whichever one of these companies is willing to kind of sit back down at the table with its workers and figure this thing out, and then can come forward and claim a $30 million exclusive contract. I don't know that
county. He's not saying the county is not going to give the union drivers the extra money they want. He's saying if you do give union drivers what they want, you come to an agreement, then you'll get an exclusive contract with the county.
Yeah. So the contract says, $30 million of concrete work, but the requirement is the company has to have a collective bargaining agreement in place, and that has to go out for at least 3 years. And so again, what he's doing here is basically giving these companies trying to give companies incentive to come to an agreement with their workers. My colleagues at the Times, Heidi Gruber and Paul Roberts, wrote about this, and there's some question about whether $30 million is actually that much money and actually worth it to them. But this is, I think until probably this week, this story in some ways had been kind of flying under the radar, but it does pose some fairly significant challenges to what are essentially mega projects.
Okay. Anybody else got? Are you all under? I get a little woozy in the head when it comes to these contracts and county contracts. But Joanne or Jazz, any reaction or questions?
Well, just taking a step back, I thought it was really ironic that the New York Times today had a story about Colorado and trying to scale back on all projects that use concrete, basically saying that, maybe we should be second thinking that. And then as I was reading that, I was thinking, yeah, but what about the West Seattle Bridge? And then with this story, I realized, yeah, you know what? Sometimes you do need this stuff.
And I don't know, you could kind of macro it a little bit more, which is this has been an sort of incredible time for labor over the last few years. I mean, totally. Unions and labor we have seen and just repeatedly are kind of at their boldest as they've been in decades, because they have more leverage than they've had in a really long time. And so from kind of slightly more white collar media jobs, for example, journalism has seen a huge upswing in unionization, but then we're also seeing it in manufacturing like this, or more blue collar work also. You could possibly draw a connection, I suppose, to what's happening in Canada there as well. But I guess in that one, the Teamsters have actually distanced themselves from that blockade. But it is, again, on a macro level.
Talking about the COVID protests.
Right.
Border.
But on a macro level, yeah, I mean, we're just kind of seeing this play out in every industry where workers are kind of realizing how much leverage they have, and oftentimes, succeeding in their efforts. This one is notable for how long it has gone on.
Okay, so a lot of people are out of work. Is that I'm wondering how temporary or long-lasting any of these effects are. People being out of work, Sound Transit. We're always hearing how Sound Transit is short on money and costs are escalating, and maybe they won't be able to build that line after all. You talk about West Seattle Bridge might be delayed. I don't know how long that means. Can you give listeners any sense of, besides the dispute that matters a lot to these concrete companies and their Teamster drivers, how much the rest of us are going to be affected for how long by this massive strike?
No, I don't think I can. I mean, it's probably too early to say, but in the world of mega projects, every day that goes by that they can't work, things get more expensive. So it is, long term, probably threatens the overall cost, but I think it's probably too early to say exactly. So yeah, I don't know about that.
Okay. Anything a listener can do about it?
Well, and it's interesting too, and I think it's it's an interesting case because as concrete drivers are on strike, it affects other construction workers and people who work on these projects who are also themselves unionized, and so it kind of creates this interesting situation where because the labor world really works when the labor world sticks together, and they really don't like having unions with competing interests. And so far we have seen the labor world mostly stick together on this one, but you have to imagine it is kind of testing that to a certain extent, because as we said, I mean, the people who are getting laid off from Sound Transit projects these aren't concrete workers. These are other workers working on other things who can't do their jobs because there is no concrete. And so, again, so far there has been mostly the labor world has been mostly unified around this. But I think part of what Dow Constantine is trying to do is kind of break that up a little bit and be like, one of you can end this right now by coming forward and taking this contract that I'm offering you.
Mm-hmm. Mm. That's David Croman covering transportation now at the Seattle Times. And we've got Jazz Kaimig with us, staff writer at The Stranger. Joanne Silberner, you've heard her cover health policy on NPR for quite some time. And even before your radio was stuck there, enjoyed Joanne's coverage. Now Joanne's a freelance journalist. And we're going to talk actually at our next item here on Week in Review does touch on health policy. We're going to talk about Oregon and Washington tripping or not, and more. We'll even give you a reason to smile if you stick around to the end of Week in Review. Mazda drivers, we know you'll be there pulling us through. So just hang tight. And when there's more of Week in Review, which by the way, you can watch because we're on YouTube and Facebook. You just search for the live stream, search KUOW Public Radio, and stay tuned.
Support for KUOW comes from 3 Health, with 35 years of experience offering personalized programs designed to help address the physical and psychological root causes of weight management issues. Presenting a virtual medical weight loss seminar on February 17th at 6 p.m. More at 3.health.
It's 12:39, and you're listening to KUOW 94.9, Seattle's NPR news station.
Support for KUOW comes from STG, presenting Black Violin, March 4th at the Paramount Theater. Violist and violinist Will Baptiste and Kev Marcus combine their classical training and hip-hop influences, creating a multi-genre sound often described as classical boom. Tickets at stgpresents.org.
The BBC NewsHour is coming up at 1 o'clock. We should see mostly clear skies and a low around 36 tonight. Lots of sunshine for the weekend, highs near 54 both days. Let's get back to Week in Review and Bill.
We're figuring out what happened this week and what it means on Week in Review. Bill Radke here, and my journalist colleagues and I are figuring out topic by topic what went down this week. And we're going to talk psilocybin now, the active ingredient in so-called magic mushrooms. It has shown some promise for treating depression and PTSD. We're still learning about that, as you're about to hear. Our state lawmakers here have been talking about making psilocybin available for that use, for therapeutic use. But this week, that idea got dropped for now, to the disappointment of the co-director of the Psychedelic Medicine Alliance, Tatiana Luz Quintana.
I believe that folks should be caring about this because these are alternative medicines that we currently don't have access to that could help a great deal of people, particularly given the mental health crisis that this country has right now.
health policy reporter Joanne Silberner. We know our neighbors, Oregon, decriminalized psilocybin mushrooms last year. Why did Washington lawmakers drop the idea this week?
I think Austin Jenkins had a really interesting take on that on KUOW the other day, where he said that with a bill that's going to make a pretty fundamental change, it usually has to kick around a little while. It usually has to be considered, come back in a different form, have, sort of more discussion. It needs to sit and steep. And he sounded pretty optimistic
tea,
that,
for example,
say again?
Needs to sit and steep like some kind of mushroom tea.
There you go. And you could say that for the data as well. There actually has been, I thought that there was some data, but not a lot, but I just came across something in Scientific American where they said psilocybin has been tried on more people in clinical trials than some of the antidepressants that have been approved, were approved by the FDA many years ago. I didn't realize that the numbers were that great in terms of how many people have tried it. So there's a fair amount of data. The side effects are low. There were questions about the particulars of the bill. It put a lot on the Department of Health in terms of determining how it was going to be used. And as I think the Seattle Times pointed out, they're kind of busy these days. And it's a lot, to throw in a whole new program might be a lot. So I think, if what Austin said the other day was right, it probably come up again and it'll probably get through the next time.
Yeah. And I think another positive to, what we saw this session was that, more than 300 people, signed up to speak in support of the bill. So, and from all different types of backgrounds, like doctors, veterans, researchers. So I think it kind of really demonstrated that this is something that Washingtonians are really interested in and has like a lot of support in the state. And I think also kind of coming off of this pandemic that, did a number on all of our mental health, I'm pretty sure. I think it's really important that, legislators are kind of, support bills like these that kind of let people access, different types of medicine to kind of get the kind of collective psychic healing that we all need after this time.
And the deal is that this would be for adults at a registered facility, right? And there would be someone supervising you. I can't remember whether this was KUOW's own reporting or whether I saw this description in the Seattle Times or where, but there are trained and licensed, the term was trip sitters.
I think that was Rich Smith in The Stranger. That
trip sitter, like, right? So someone who's there with you, and I don't know how much, whether it's active therapy or more like, hey, I'm here, I'm someone you trust, everything's okay. Yeah, do you know more about that, Jazz?
I don't, but I do know that set and setting is like the most important things when you're doing psychedelic drugs. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so, the DOH, the Department of Health has a lot going on. And this is, as we say, a short session. This is not a usual long legislative session where you expect everything to get dealt with. But David, do you know whether this support that we were just talking about, this public support, and I don't have numbers behind that, whatever public support there is for the therapeutic use of psilocybin, do we know whether that is a Democrat thing versus a Republican thing, or whether it's across the board? I would say in the public and in the legislature.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my only sort of point of reference is thinking back to the initiative, I guess in 2012 that legalized marijuana in the state. It was Barack Obama's re-election year, and we saw divides, sort of as you'd expect across the state, except for the marijuana one. It was pretty much passing by the same margins across the whole state. So, I think there's some indication that it feels a little bit to me like the same kind of march that we saw with marijuana, which is kind of, dipping a toe in and raising the idea. But even in the last year or two, it really has, I would say the discussion around psilocybin and psychedelics has increased quite a bit. Seattle kind of had its own whole kind of separate conversation. It's already, we talk about decriminalizing, but at least in Seattle, there hasn't been nobody's getting arrested or penalized for anything related to mushrooms these days. So it's, for all intents and purposes, kind of already decriminalized in the city. So, I don't know enough about the partisanship around this, but it does kind of have that same feel that marijuana had, which is, kind of a little shocking at first, but then with each month and year, it starts to kind of ingratiate itself a little bit more into the mainstream conversation.
I mean, it is a bit of a libertarian approach of, why should we prevent people from doing this? It's not like, with some of the other drugs where there were criminal conspiracies behind it. I don't think there's any criminal conspiracy associated with psilocybin. So from that deregulating point of view, you could see that there might be a push from that side of the political spectrum. On the other hand, though, there will be a fair amount. It'll be interesting to see how much regulation comes through with whatever gets passed.
Yeah. And I believe from Rich's reporting, he mentioned one Republican state legislator that mentioned that she had heard someone had a bad trip one time. But I think broadly, Senator Jesse Solomon, who pushed this, said that it had, bipartisan support or bipartisan interest, but it was, again, that kind of stricture of the shortened session this year, and trying to build a regulatory system from the ground up, just not really being the priority for a lot of people right now.
And Joanne, in my head, I sometimes conflate what I've heard about microdosing of LSD. There's that going on, and then there's psilocybin mushrooms. Is it that exact? Would this bill have had the Department of Health, figuring out certain doses, and do we know enough to do that?
I think enough is almost known, and there are a lot of clinical trials going on, and there's a fair amount of information on this clinically, so that would be known. I'm not sure how prescriptive DOH would have been under this bill. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. And one last thing, what about the FDA? Is the FDA, are they going to improve marijuana use? Are they going to approve psilocybin use?
Well, they have listed psilocybin. They have a category of approval called breakthrough drugs. These are drugs that they think are needed, and they want to help a company that signs up for breakthrough drug application gets a lot of assistance from the FDA in preparing the application. What do you need to have? What kind of numbers do you need? The FDA works hand in hand with them, and they've assigned breakthrough status to psilocybin. So I think if they get a credible application, it could happen, and it could happen fast.
And my understanding is, at least with like some migraine medicines share a kind of component of psilocybin, that some of the I did very badly in chemistry in high school, but some of the sort of base components behind some migraine medicines sort of share DNA or whatever it is with psilocybin. So it is a component that has been looked at and sort of folded into some mainstream medicine practices.
Okay. So we were just talking about the psilocybin regulation and trip sitting idea being not getting through the legislature this time around. Let's touch on something that's still alive in the legislature, an almost $17 billion transportation package backed by the Democrats. David, we know that transportation money is for highway projects and transit and stuff. Is this your typical transpo package, or is there something especially surprising or intriguing being discussed here?
Yeah, I mean, so this would be the fourth in the last 20 years, but the other three were based mostly off of increases to the gas tax, and also done kind of in a bipartisan way. This one is, at least so far, has been almost exclusively a Democratic-led proposal, doesn't include an increase to the gas tax. And, I think past transportation packages have really focused mostly on big highway projects. This one still does that, but also has a much bigger focus on transit. Billions.
Is that why it's gotten more partisan? Because Republicans want projects, highway projects, but now it's getting more partisan than that.
Yeah, I think that's right. The Democrats, the Republicans are saying that the Democrats didn't really even reach out to them on this one, and the Democrats don't actually really deny that that's true. I think it is because they had some specific goals in mind. They decided they wanted to prioritize more transit, increase its role. And, I think another big part of this is a lot of the funding of this comes from this new kind of cap and trade carbon system that is coming online in Washington state. And Republicans opposed that it passed last session, and Republicans opposed it. And so the heads of the Democratic leadership basically said, well, you guys opposed what is basically a third of the funding for this thing in the first place. So, we don't feel like we can negotiate with you on this. But I mean, it would have a pretty massive impact. We're talking, like you said, almost $17 billion. It would make public transit ridership free for anybody 18 or under. It would see fairly dramatic spending on transit at the local level, and new ferries, and a lot for salmon, and then also
hybrid electric ferries.
Yeah. So it's a big proposal. It certainly is unfolding differently than past proposals have, but even Republicans are sort of acknowledging, well, I mean, the Democrats have the votes for this, so if they want to pass it, they probably can. And I have not heard of any Democrats so far who do not want to vote for that. So I would be surprised at this point if it doesn't get a fairly swift kind of hit the fast lane, to stretch the metaphor a little bit, to the governor's desk.
I did have a question. I noticed that in your reporting that you mentioned that $50 million will be going towards communities affected by highway construction. Do you have any idea of what that would look like, or who that would go to?
Yeah, so that's this kind of larger conversation that's happening around highways, and how they contribute to climate change, and then their history with destroying a lot of low-income communities and communities of color. And so this would I think it would be a grant-based system. So kind of the exact projects that this would fund, unclear, but you could see it going to neighborhoods like South Park, for example, or maybe even Chinatown International District, some places, Yakima. I mean, communities that have these kind of fairly large highways going right through them. Right. A lot of South King County, and exactly kind of what that would fund, I think, is unclear right now. I don't think $50 million is enough to say, lid I-5,
right? Yeah.
But it is enough that maybe they do more mitigation, plant trees along the highway, that sort of thing. And in some ways, it's kind of more of a symbolic gesture. I mean, $50 million is not symbolic, but it is sort of indicative of like a first step in sort of acknowledging the larger role that highways have played in community development, and trying to kind of fix some of the impacts of that.
Okay, and did I hear you say that Democrats are getting this transportation package through without much or any Republican support, and that might be possible now but not later? Do Democrats think that their majority, their ability to do things like this, is going to disappear?
I don't know about disappear, but I mean, certainly when I think, they took the gas tax off the table really early, which was not unanimously agreed upon among the Democrats. But I do think when you talk to people, it was almost exclusively because this is an election year, and all signs point to a fairly bad one for Democrats. And so there's sort of two things happening here. One, they're kind of trying to show that they can, pass big things and fix your pet projects. But then also, I do think that there's some sense that this might not be as easy to do for the Democrats if they want to do it in the way that they want in the future. If they lose seats, you'd have to check in with my political colleagues to know exactly kind of what the odds are of the Senate or the House flipping. But you mentioned this is a short session. The other packages had not been done in short sessions; they had been done in long sessions. So even the fact that it's an even year and they were racing this thing through is notable. And I think there are lots of reasons for that. Chief among them is they have a lot of federal money coming in, and it's a good time to spend it. But then also, I do think that the fact that it's an election year and they might not have quite the grip on power that they have now in the future certainly is a motivator.
Okay. All right. We'll see if that transportation package is on a high-speed rail, or if it's going to be to get stuck in sticky concrete. Doesn't sound like it. Democrats have the votes for now. So let's move. We've got 4 minutes left in the show. I always like to leave listeners with a reason to smile or be hopeful. And I noticed that Oscar nominations came out this week, and that one of the Best Picture nominees is set in West Seattle. It's called West Side Story. I assume it's about two lovers in West Seattle. One runs a concrete company and the other is a teamster, and their gangs are feuding, and caught in the middle are the people of West Seattle who just want their bridge to reopen. As the movie begins, we meet a starry-eyed West Seattleite who's sure that any day there'll be some way to get home, a bridge, a light rail line, something.
Could it be? Yes, it could. Something's coming, something could. If I can wait, something's coming. I don't know what it is, but it is gonna be great.
We don't know what it is either or when. Meanwhile, the former mayor, Greg Nichols, is from West Seattle. Here, he and Jenny Durkin sing a tender ballad about leaving office.
A time and place for us. Hold my hand.
Oh, such a poignant scene. While on the street below, there's a protest at the West Seattle precinct. That's West Side Story, the odds-on favorite for Best Picture. It's either that or another Seattle-based film, Power of the Dog Park. So watch the Academy Awards, March 27th. Anything making you smile or feel hopeful this week?
I was telling you guys before he came on, I've been really obsessed with Jackass recently, and they recently came up with a new film, I think last week, called Jackass Forever. And I was never allowed to watch it when I was younger because my mom didn't want me and my brother like redoing any of those like crazy stunts that those guys do. But
This is dudes hitting each other and dudes doing, as you say, dangerous stunts.
Yeah, very lewd things. And I don't know, I find it so funny as an adult now. I can't stop watching them. It's kind of like the grandfather to like Vine or TikTok, where it's these what you can do to get people to continue to look at you, and they really care about one another. And I don't know, I love this 2000s nostalgia era that we're coming into, and I'm just kind of trying to reap as much as I can from it. So that's what's making me smile, is people hurting themselves.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's a bumper sticker right there.
Yeah.
Anything else to smile about, Joanne, David?
Longer days.
Yeah.
Sunshine. Whoa, false spring. I'm all for it.
Yeah, bring on the fake spring. True. David, anything more?
I'm just trying to think of what the like West Seattle version of the Jets and the Sharks would be. What are the Seattle version?
Extended that.
Yeah. No, but I agree. The sun is, even if it's limited, is great. I'm basking in it as we speak.
Yeah. How about the Bengals are in the Super Bowl? The Cincinnati Bengals are Ohio's Mariners. They have not won a playoff game in 31 years. It's their first Super Bowl in 33 years. So I'm kind of sentimental about that. The Mariners have never been to the Super Bowl, by the way. Never will. So that's coming up this weekend. Hey, it's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to figure out the week together. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming on this week.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
We've been talking to The Strangers staff writer Jazz Keimig, freelance journalist Joanne Silberner, Seattle Times transportation reporter David Croman. That's the week gone by. The show's produced by Kevin Kniested, with social media and live streaming by Juan Pablo Chiquiza and Tio Popescu. I appreciate you listening. Bill Radke here, and Mazda drivers, enjoy thoughtful, informative news coverage every minute of every day for the rest of your life.